Africa must now move in the direction of defining herself and defining her agenda in all the critical areas of human development. For too long now, our continent has been dependent on other civilizations. For too long now, the continent of Africa has been a continent which receives that which the world has rejected. For too long now, the continent has been seen as a political, economic, and social lightweight. For too long now, Africa has not participated in the arena of technology, discovery, and innovation as she should. For too long now, Africa has been treated as the underdog. And I hold the view that when we are gathered here, those of you who are present physically and those of you who are present virtually, it is time for us to recognize that the long-term health of Africa not only requires but demands that the mother continent must now wake up to the reality that the world requires that we up the ante in all the critical areas that will see us catapulted to the orbit of human development. And I'm happy that I'm talking to you during a year when Africa, through its existing institutions, have come up with the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. The Africa Continental Free Trade Area tells us that in a few years' time, speaking to Africa Agenda 2063, all the Bismarckian borders that were imposed on us in the year 1884 and 1885 in Berlin will exist only for purposes of administration. That it will be possible for a person who is trading in Abuja to access the markets in Cape Town in South Africa and to move without let and hindrance from Cape Town in South Africa to Djibouti, and from Djibouti to move to Dakar, Senegal, and from Dakar, Senegal to move to Bangui in Central African Republic, and thereafter to move in Ouagadougou in Burkina Faso, as if we lived in one country. That is a monumental development which we ought to remind ourselves as being critical at this time. Ladies and gentlemen, as we are going through the pain of COVID, Africa has had to rely on other civilizations for the almighty vaccine. If we are not relying on the Chinese with their Sinopharm, we are relying on the Russians with their Sputnik. And if we are not relying on the Russians, we are relying on the British with their AstraZeneca. And if we are not relying on the British, we are relying on the Germans with their Pfizer. And if we are not relying on the Germans, we are relying on the Americans with their Johnson & Johnson and Moderna. How can it be that a continent which has produced so many great minds cannot be in the forefront of invention and discovery and execution if little Cuba can do it? Why shouldn't Africa be a continent that engages in these critical arenas that will change the lives of our people? It can be done and it must be done. And this is the occasion at which I'm putting it on the table that it behooves us to do it. You know, you will remember on the 27th day of April, the year 2001, Africa gathered in Abuja, Nigeria, and came up with the Abuja Protocol, under whose theme it was agreed that African countries would dedicate 15% of their budget to the health sector. COVID has now demonstrated to us that we did not. COVID has found us naked. COVID has exposed our health systems. COVID has exposed our economies. COVID has exposed the fragility of our societies. COVID has exposed the fragility of our societal cohesion. COVID has exposed the fragility of our aviation sector. COVID has exposed the fragility of our economies. COVID has found us out. And that is why as I talk about the many things that we can do and must do, I'm also reminded that it is critical and necessary that African countries must now begin to engage in inventions and innovation beyond the medical field that I've talked about and go into different arenas. We must be able to use our intellectual wherewithal and our intellectual firepower, not to rely on China and Korea and Japan, so that when we are gathered as we are and we talk of the Nigerian Society of Engineers, our engineering is beyond paper qualification. We must be civil engineers whose greatest claim to fame is that they can preside over the extension of road networks across Africa so that we can move with ease. We must be electrical engineers whose greatest claim to fame is that they are presiding over an Africa which is well lit, an Africa that can use our resources, the sun, the wind, and all those in order to light up Africa so that she must not be called the dark continent. An Africa whose chemical engineers are present and will not rely on Italians and French to deal with our oil and will not be inviting Shell and ExxonMobil and Elf. An Africa whose biochemical engineers will be present and will be in the forefront of innovation so that we are not relying on the Germans. That is the Africa that I'm talking about. I have asked myself, what should I speak about on an occasion such as this? Should I speak about engineering and its significance in Africa and the world? And I told myself, there are better men and women qualified to speak about engineering because I'm not one. I've asked myself, should I speak about the pandemic, COVID-19, that has and continues to ravage the world? Yet again I say, I'm not a doctor, and therefore I'm unqualified to speak with the requisite authority and intellectual firepower. I've therefore chosen to be eclectic in my presentation, with the intention solely of animating your thoughts in the hope that ultimately the idea that I put on the table will not only cross-fertilize your very own or cross-pollinate your very own, but will provide us with a menu out of which, as we think about the continent of Africa, we'll be able to pick and choose the things that we ought to grapple with as we go through this pandemic.